Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Paul Campbell, and I've spent 36 years working in the dairy industry around the world. And today I'd like to discuss a very interesting topic about how dairy companies can thrive in this environment, a very changed environment, perhaps unprecedented, but I think will be the new normal. So I'll introduce Hamish Keston shortly, but let me just explain why this topic chose us. Firstly, nearly all food categories, and particularly agricultural categories, have faced really unusual challenges over the last 36 months, both on the consumption side, but also on the supply side. For agriculture, these challenges and disruptions have been particularly emphasized by physical, seasonal, geopolitical, and socioeconomic impacts, such as the Ukraine war, such as very high inflation. It's unlikely that agricultural markets, including the global dairy market, will revert to pre-2020 behaviours and context. That stability and predictability is probably never going to be with us again. So adapting to this new context is hugely important for dairy companies, no matter where they play in the supply chain, whether you're at the farm end, whether you're at the consumer end, or somewhere in the middle. It's going to be incredibly important that companies can respond to these challenges and particularly the opportunities. So Hamish, perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I'm Hamish Keston. I'm Senior Vice President of Dairy at Boston Data Labs. Haven't spent quite as long in the dairy industry as Paul yet. I've clocked up 20 years. Excited to be talking about the subject today. Paul, maybe you could talk us a little bit about the real context and what you think the big issues are that you think we face in dairy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hamish. Let's look at some of the sort of simple data points for the dairy industry. I mean, if we stand back and look at agriculture, of course, the agricultural price indices around the world, whether you're looking in the US or Europe, have been all over the place. They've gone up. They're now coming down very rapidly. Why is that? This because of this lack of predictability on supply and demand. It's bringing in new players in terms of hedge funds into some of these markets. And so the market's responding quite differently than it did pre-2020. More volatility, less predictability. So we've seen the same in milk prices around the world, where we've seen the arbitrage between milk prices between different regions extremely high, probably going back to pre-1980s levels. Why is that the case? Big changes in supply chain and logistics, just impossible to get product moved around the world easily, in which case it's very, very hard to close arbitrage values. Consumer trends in food across the world are changing massively. So consumers in this highly inflationary environment are trading down. They're going to cheaper products, more accessible and more affordable products. That trading down in product mix has caused some real challenges in terms of how dairy companies particularly respond to optimize their mix with consumers and with supermarkets. And in some markets, the trend for dairy, unfortunately, is dairy is bad. There's an environmental concern that's really having an impact on some consumers. And a lot of those consumers are critically very, very high value consumers. Farmers are facing high inflation around their supply side inputs, and of course, huge environmental concerns. So we see all of these things coming together. We've seen as I said, the re-emergence of very, very high arbitrage values between different regions in terms of milk price. And because of supply chain disruptions, we're seeing very, very high safety stocks, despite the higher cost of financing those safety stocks because of high interest rates. So we're seeing disruptions all over the place. It's interesting. But the real question here is, where are the opportunities and how do you capture them? Hamish, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of dairy, there's a number of things we need to think about to drive the response of dairy customers. So, I mean, top of mind for me is there's a lot of talk about there'll be increased customer price sensitivity. But then cost of living concerns are driving rapid substitution between supply options and also across products. So, for instance, from milk powder to a filled milk powder, and I think some of these drivers will override sort of short-term concerns about environmental impacts. And why I think that is, during the last sort of GFC, what we saw is people's demand for organics really dropped off. And so although they kind of valued that and that had become part of their daily sort of shopping, when it came down and they were squeezed, they saw it as a luxury item. And so I think in the short term, people won't be quite so worried about sort of some of these environmental concerns around dairy and things like that. Instead, they'll be looking at sort of their wallet and things like that. I think there's difficulty in responding quickly to changes in consumer demand. And it's just like, yeah, you can't turn the ship sort of quickly. And so even this will be storable and long life shelf products. And so this is going to ride in either more write-offs or having to sell products off cheaper and generating sort of other inefficiencies. And I think the combination of both high financing costs of holding increased safety stocks and the high risk of getting the stock wrong and stock aging out is also going to have a significant impact in terms of dairy. And then the other factor is just with so much volatility in terms of pricing, really knowing what to pay for milk and when and how to lay the volume down, there's just going to be a lot of uncertainty, and that's going to create sort of price risk both upstream and downstream.
So, Hamish, we've talked a lot about the kind of the challenges out there. I guess the question that a lot of our audience will have is, so where are the opportunities? So where do you see the opportunities in this kind of market context we have now that could be going for some time, perhaps forever?
Yeah, I think it's all about how dairy companies set themselves up to respond, and with these sort of all these supply chain disruptions and volatility that we're seeing, you need to be able to respond in an agile and much quicker way. And so it's easy to say that companies with agile people, systems, and processes will create the most value, but I guess it comes down to kind of what does this really mean? So for me, it's the first one is about building the right culture, and sort of key parts of that is information sharing, so that what the salespeople are seeing at the front line, what procurement people are seeing in terms of what sort of they're bringing in, is being shared across the organisation, so you can put the pieces together, and then critical thinking and having the ability to have those open discussions and challenge each other about it. And then I think also it's gonna feel like because you're going to have to take more risk and there's less predictability and certainty. So risk taking is also another important part to build into your culture. The second point I think is about building and maintaining information and data platforms. So having disconnected systems and processes where you're not getting the data in real time, you're not bringing it together, whether that's through a single tool or through a data lake that you can then access and do the analysis on. If you don't have that, that's going to be a real sort of Achilles heel. And making sure you've got the right tools. And so, of course, I've got to talk about optimization tools that support those accurate and timely decisions, specifically around different potential scenarios and forecasts. And you've got to think through those scenarios sort of quite carefully. And the other thing I'd call out about the scenarios is it's all very well to come up with different scenarios, but then you've got to actually plan out what you're going to do under those different potential scenarios, and have signposts that you're going to recognise, so that you know if you see something in particular sort of happen, that that you know that, look, we're heading down that scenario. So one that I in my last one of my last roles, sort of on the actual dairy company side, was we'd basically, one of my signposts was, if we went away for Christmas and New Year's and had an absolutely great time at the beach, it would mean when I came back, it's like we're highly likely to have a drought, and so we had to start putting in place and taking steps to deal with that. Having the systems and tools that can respond quickly to the changing environment. So again, scenario planning is a key aspect of that, but also is being able to bring that data and generate it into insights quickly. And then having the right metrics and data to measure and learn from, so that you're taking in those learnings and what's happening in a particular situation, and then using that next time. So, Paul, have you got sort of any like sort of real examples where you've seen cash value has been created?
Yeah, I think probably my experience has been much more in the tools that are optimizing the match between demand and supply planning, particularly for consumer products and fast-moving consumer goods, where you're seeing quite rapid changes in consumer demand. It's driven by some of the trends that we've already identified, but specifically, where there's disruption, whether that's geopolitical, whether that's economic, or whether it's just social, or even just something as simple as a major weather pattern or earthquake or something coming through. All of these things have a big impact on consumer demand, and that goes through the supply chain very, very quickly. And what these tools are now enabling people to do and optimize is actually get information through to the retailers, to the supermarkets, through to even quite small stores in some developing countries, where the dairy company is explaining to the supermarket or the retailer what their optimal ordering mix is and how it should be and when it should be delivered to them. So they can optimize their working capital, they can optimize their shelf space, they can reduce stock outs, so they don't lose shelf space to just understocked or blank shelves. Those are really big ticket items. They're very, very valuable for a dairy company's customers. But when you then turn back and look at all that information coming in, it means that the production planning, the transport planning can all be optimized around those things. So it means that you get a much more integrated position. And the sort of things that you see in these things is, reducing stock outs on supermarket shelves by, 30%. And that's a big and very valuable thing to be able to offer your customers. It creates value immediately for them. It also creates value immediately for you. So getting those things right and being able to respond to changes is really important. Additionally, particularly for fast-moving consumer goods and particularly short shelf life dairy products, having the wrong mix results in having to discount or even dispose of product, and that's just tremendously expensive and wasteful. So by putting these tools in place, it's possible to provide real benefits right across the supply chain, reducing inventory and even not just finished product inventory, but all your packaging inventory and everything else is very, very important in today's context. But as everybody knows right now, you've still got to hold safety stocks because you're not sure exactly how the supply chain is going to be responding behind you. But those things can be planned. Issues can be mitigated where they're seen in different scenarios planned forward. So I think all of these things give real benefits to a dairy company, but they also give real benefits to a dairy company's customers, whether they're big or small. on the probably the hidden benefit of a lot of detailed planning and scenario planning is actually just getting consensus on what the plan is going forward. So if everybody in a company has the view of today's consensus on what's going to be made, what's not going to be made, when and how it's going to be delivered, then it's tremendously valuable. Now, that's not to say it won't change tomorrow, because, of course, the market context can change tomorrow. But at every step, having one version of the truth, one version of the optimal position to take is incredibly valuable for companies in this environment. And the ability to be able to change that plan quickly and respond to different demands is so important today, with all of these pressures coming on and the lack of predictability. So what I see now is companies are able to adopt these processes, and to be honest, this culture have a tremendous advantage over other companies because they can respond more quickly, they can respond more comprehensively to changes in the market. They can plan for different scenarios. They can plan their risk for different scenarios and choose, proactively what they're going to do before a scenario hits them. And that's very, very important. So there's sort of surprises, but there's fewer unplanned surprises. So those are sort of things that they seem unusual in today's context, but I think having those different scenarios, talking about them, getting a consensus on how you will behave, what decisions you'll take into those different scenarios, looking for those signposts that Hamish will identifying the right signposts and then looking for them is a fantastic opportunity for companies that will turn into real value, not only for the company, but for the company's customers. So I think that those are the opportunities. But Hamish, we always talk a lot about the opportunities, but hey, there are some real challenges to getting here. So let's also be fair and talk about those. Hamish, have a think about those.
Yeah. No, I mean, you talked about kind of the tools and having the information, but I think it's really important to how you highlighted that it's having everyone like a consensus around that, and so it's not like it's people, process, and tools, and you can't just focus on one. You've got to bring the people along, have the appropriate sort of processes in place, have the right culture in place that people can talk and challenge. But yeah, I mean, sort of focusing a little bit around the tools here. I think one of the issues that companies often strike when you're looking at adopting a new tool is it's kind of like, oh no, it's another IT project, so that they get fatigued and gun shy about an IT project, particularly if they've recently done an ERP implementation or upgrade, and so they try not to, or they avoid, say, taking that investment into the tools. And then they may have comfort with their existing tools. So often we see Excel empires, and people can sort of understand that they've built it themselves, and there's a certain level of comfort that it's got them through in the past, and that simplicity and easy to understand it can be seen as an advantage, but the problem is it can't handle all the complexity that sometimes the complexity that's actually in the real world. And then kind of the third factor that we often we see it in the positive if you get the right engagement, but it can be in a negative if you don't get the right engagement from senior level management and buy-in from them. And one of the challenges, and I saw this in my experience sort of throughout the career, is often senior managers end up seeing a very sanitized view of the world. They don't sort of understand all the work that's gone in to put together the slides or come up with a particular number kind of thing. But I've seen it in the planning teams that I've run that just like there's a huge amount of work pulling together disparate information from different systems and things like that. And so it slows down the ability of those people that are on the front line to focus on the real value add and insights and do that scenario planning, because they're just so busy doing their day job. But then managers, like more senior managers, often don't sort of appreciate that. So those are definitely some of the challenges that that I see. Paul, have you got anything else to add around that?
Yeah, I think you've identified the ones that I always kind of start with people, because in all of these, it's an acceptance of doing things differently in a world that's already becoming a little bit more unpredictable, a little bit more complex. And I think getting people to be open about that, and speaking as someone that's managed a lot of different companies and projects, it's a lot of the time it's the managers may not have the experience of the new tools themselves, and quite often it's the younger staff and the newer staff that have that experience, and so it becomes a much more challenging to listen and to recognize that the expertise sometimes is in different parts of the organization where than it would traditionally have been the case. So I think there's tremendous value and opportunity in that for both managers and staff, to come in and really find new opportunities to work differently together. But that requires an openness and a comfort with doing that in a very difficult context where, frankly, the risks are quite high. The opportunities are high, but I think there's a lot of people that are looking at the other side of that saying, hey, the risks are quite high. But I think that the people side is important. I think the other thing that I always believe is the time to do these things is not 24 hours. This is a process of putting in place different systems, different processes, different thinking about how to make decisions, and that provides a tremendous amount of opportunity for people to have the right discussions, but it takes time, and it's not something that can be done overnight, but it is something that can be done progressively over time. I've seen a number of companies that have gone through 3 or 4 quite fast iterations, looking at different processes and different ways of doing things, and improving them along the way. So not just trying to get to the perfect end process, but getting something 50 or 60% better than it was, and then looking for 80%, and then maybe looking for 100%, but not trying to get to 100% on day one, because I think in this world, it's probably not the right way of approaching it. So those are the big things, I think. But we have to be honest. I mean, these solutions take time and energy and investment to make work. But I think the opportunities that they create for companies are huge and very sustainable. So, they're not fleeting kind of pieces of value, one-off pieces of value. They're recurring pieces of value, and particularly if companies are able to improve the speed and the accuracy of their decision-making around some of these things, that is enduring competitive advantage. So I guess, what is the real, when we talk about realism here, the time to do these things, I mean, what do you think about that?
You mean the timing of when to kind of start?
But the time when to start, and when do you see some, positive results, and then when do you see the refined results?
I mean, no, I mean, there's a great quote, like often overused, but when's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? When's the second best time to plant a tree today? And I liked what you talked about in terms of don't necessarily go to get 100% there, like get like 40% there, then go for 60 and then 80 kind of thing. Because with all this uncertainty that you're seeing, you don't necessarily know what the perfect end solution is going to be like. So I think it is important to have kind of medium-term where you're putting something in place, testing it, seeing if it's working, and then reassessing, and then saying, well, where do we need to get to kind of next? So, and I mean, something that we focus on when we're doing an implementation is it's not spend 6, 8, 9, 12 months sort of building something and then finally get the solution at the end, as we look to implement and drop different modules as we go, and embed those within the company, bring the company along, make sure they understand it, and then we learn from that and then work out where the next steps are. Yeah, and I guess sort of other things that I kind of think about, or that I sort of emphasize to people, is about sort of why work with us is we have a proven track record in both dairy and meat, where we really focus. We've got people like you and I, Dave on the meat side, that have actually worked on the customer side, run these supply chains, and understand the industries and the challenges. And I think, like, the other thing I really kind of value about how we work as a company is we're honest. And if we can't solve your problem, we won't take on the project if we don't think we're the right company to partner with you, and we'll be up front and tell you that. And then I guess the kind of what gets me up and gets me excited is we've got a bunch of really smart people that thrive on solving complex but real world problems, who are just incredibly customer focused about delivering sort of real value, and not just doing it in a theoretical sort of context. So yeah,
I think it's exciting when you look at the opportunities here. The opportunities that have been created, by a market context that's very different and very unusual, and sometimes very challenging. But the opportunities that are created by the expertise and data expertise, and just sheer intelligence of people working on that front, with people that have been working with dairy product mix and dairy categories and dairy supply chains for a huge number of years. So I think when you combine those two things, you do get something that's unique, and to respond to this context of today in a fairly unique context. But I think when we look going forward, as you say, when do you start planting this tree? I mean, probably to think that you could have planted it 20 years ago is a little bit tricky if you haven't started already. But it's better to start now, get that first module going, see the benefits of it, and get the learning going, get the organizational learning going, and then it is a little bit of a journey, but that's you've got to start and keep moving forward. And I don't think any company's any different in terms of any form of innovation, but I think just today, with the both on the opportunity side and on the risk side, it's going to create enduring value for dairy companies, but also for their customers. So I think that's probably, from my perspective, the most exciting thing.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Well, no, it was good, great discussion, Paul. Always enjoy having a chat with you. So, and hopefully the people that are tuning in got something out of it too. So, yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you another time.
Thank you very much, everybody.